All right, I am here with Gary Cardone. Gary and I are going to talk about Bitcoin, the upcoming bull market run for Bitcoin and crypto, as well as the ETFs that are pending approval and many other things. But before we jump in, here's one thing I want to do. Gary also has a YouTube channel. So I'm going to show you this YouTube channel here. He's got some killer interviews up there already. Lawrence Leopard, that was a great interview. Working my way through that one. Vivek Ramaswamy, running for president. Good interview there. Great interview with your brother, Grant. Listened to that one when I was on the road traveling a few weeks back when that one released. So he's got some really, really good interviews coming up. He's at 6,000 subscribers. Let's push him to 10,000 today on this. So I'm going to put the link in the notes below so you can go there, subscribe to his channel, check out some of this content he's got. You've got some really good shorts up there. Kind of what prompted this conversation today. I saw your short the other day talking about Bitcoin and the upcoming bull market and how to position yourself. So Gary, welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, Greg, good to see you. It's been a little while and glad to connect back with you. I think the last time we spoke was maybe 2 months ago, and Bitcoin was probably sub 30,000. We were all talking about the ETF then, and we're still talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was in that consolidation between 25 to 31,000. And the expectation was it was going to range there until we got some sort of news on Bitcoin. And I think what's happened lately, do you look at the charts at all, or you just, how do you?
Yeah, I have a chart up right now, a one-day chart over relatively long period of time, and just looking at the channel between August and today. There's a channel that this thing's just moving in $3,000 spread, and that was the purpose of the video, looking at this thing, saying, hey, if I wanted to deploy more, how do you deploy more? If and I have some bias, right? I'm already long the asset. For me, it's very difficult for me to see this thing going down $10,000 and staying there. Could I see oh, that's awesome. So you know how to do all this stuff. Could I see 3 days where you had a liquidity crash or a nuclear weapon go off somewhere, or Elon Musk died, or who knows what could happen? Sure, you could have a down moment, but I think the problem is I don't know a lot of people sitting around with buckets of cash just sitting in a cash depository account waiting for a crash. And I think when that crash comes, also that flash crash, it's very difficult to make a decision in a 30% down day. Now I think that's the right time to make the decision, but it's scary.
So before we get there,
yeah,
where do you feel like Bitcoin is going to go? Once the ETF is launched. Obviously, you're making a decision, waiting for that. You're thinking, when do I deploy a large chunk of liquidity into this thing? What is your price target just after the ETF? Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, I'm not convinced 100% that it's going to go. I could see a hoodwink here, right? I could see the government playing a little game. It would surprise me a bit, but I could give that a 30%, 20% chance that it gets delayed beyond January the 6th. However, to answer your question, if it were to get approved January the 6th or near that date, it's hard for me to believe that you're not going to see a 10 to 20% move, within a week or so with just volume. And it's clearly someone's buying right here. This is not just, Dogecoin moving into Bitcoin. I do not believe that. I think there's some real buyers here. And I've been spending a lot of time with family offices. People are now deploying. So to answer your question, 57, 47, 49, 57, somewhere in there. And that's pre-halving.
Yep, that's this range right here. So 48 is right here at this last peak in March of 2022. And then 57 would be right up here after that initial, from the bottom of July 2021, right up into this first pop before it pulled back into the final run. And then of course that's your $69,000 top. What's interesting is, this whole move here off of that $15,000 consolidation back in November last year, was interesting because the first pop came off that XRP win, right? Then the next pop came off of, the Grayscale news of Grayscale winning their issue. And this last pop came off that narrative of the November window, where a lot of people were thinking that the ETFs were going to get approved during that window in November that the SEC had. And now it's January, right? The narrative is everything's going to get approved January 10th, which when you look at the deadlines of a lot of the SEC decisions, a lot of them are January, but there's several of them in May as well. So, it'll be interesting. But yeah, to your point, you've seen the news out there. There's somebody that's been buying what, $30 to $50 million a day of Bitcoin. I know there are some family offices out there accumulating. I know some of the funds are probably starting to accumulate. It's really interesting right now, because if you look at, this is the 1-day chart here in this channel you're talking about, where everybody's been waiting for a pullback because we've had them all the way through. And you've got a couple of things going on. Each one of these pullbacks is about the 50% Fibonacci retracement level from the bottom to the top, with the exception of this one here. This was 100% retracement, back in September. I can't remember why this happened. Might have been something with the bonds, taking off, bond yields taking off back during that time frame. And then, the markets have been off to the races too. But, 50% pullback on the Fibonacci, if you look at it, what's really interesting right now would put you right at this area right here, right around $31,000. And I think you were expecting a pullback. A lot of people are expecting a pullback off of this level, 35 to 31,000, somewhere in that range. So that would be your 50% Fibonacci level on a retracement. The other thing that's interesting is if you follow, relative strength index, the RSI, you've got bearish divergence right now. Price is going up while the strength is going down. Relative strength is going down. Every time we've reached this oversold condition, we get a little bit of a pullback, right? But, you can be oversold for a while, especially if you look at the weekly. You can go back and look at some of these runs in the past, like, the initial bull run. You can be oversold for quite a while before things pull back, and we're still not quite there, on the weekly. If you look at the monthly, it looks like we still got a lot of ways to go compared to the last, couple of times. So I don't know if we're going to get that pullback.
Oh, really? Excuse me, I'm just suffering with a little bit of a cold here, but you don't think you're going to get it, huh? Because before you were pretty convinced, hey, this thing's going to trade as it trades and it's going to pull back. What makes you think you might not see the pullback? Because that is really my concern, right? That it's a little bit of fear of, hey, could this thing run away from you? I didn't have the guts to load up. And I think that's the conversation, right? We're talking about loading up a large position. I didn't do that at 15. Okay. For me at 15, there was less clarity. Now, crazy guy would have bought this at $3, right? And we probably wouldn't even be talking about this, but, and I didn't have the liquidity opportunity then. I had to clear some things up. That's what people forget. I just don't think people fully appreciate, most people just don't have stacks of cash waiting for that opportunity, that doomsday. That's what Buffett does, right? He'll just sit there for years on cash doing nothing. And then, go in and buy Goldman at $90 and bends them over when they're, it's not just value hunting, it's predatory fishing.
Yeah. And to me, yeah, so it takes time to move. If you're gonna enter with a large position, it takes time to move that around. You can't do it just in a day. You need 4 or 5 days to move a significant position around. So back when it was at 15,000, the ETF news wasn't even a thing. We didn't have much of a consolidation at that level. There was a lot going on that, yeah, it could have dropped a little bit lower. And, the interesting thing about that is stocks were way more interesting and have been way more interesting since that 15,000 level. And that's what I've been doing. I've been mostly in stocks. I've been out of crypto since that time frame and haven't done anything with Bitcoin or any other crypto because most of it's only doubled. There's been a few altcoins that have, tripled and quadrupled. And that's the other part of the conversation too, is that a lot of that capital knows, Bitcoin will run once you get the ETF approval. I think my thesis has always been, we're going to have a quick snap to previous all-time highs. Maybe we'll hit 100,000 and then you'll start to see a lot of profit taking and pullbacks, I think, at those levels. And then you've got Ethereum and the altcoins that are going to run, and you're going to get much bigger moves out of those. You're going to get some 10 to 20 X's out of a lot of those. A lot of just the large and mid cap alts. There's going to be even bigger moves in, some of the low cap, micro caps. But just like your Solanas, your Filecoins, potentially your Cardanos, Maddox, I mean, just, Sushi Swap, all the different, general crypto cycle should play out. I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it's happened all 4 cycles so far. Bitcoin will run, we'll get a double out of that, maybe a little bit more. And then that liquidity, I think, is going to rotate around. The question is, how low will it drop? And with the ETFs and the move into the space, I think your downside is going to be limited moving forward, unless there's just a major market meltdown, and then all risk assets are going to drop.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I drew channels on this last move since August, and I come up with the same answer you come up with. I'm by no means a chartist, but it's like it's at 37.7 right now. It pierced through 38 last night. It keeps playing with this 38. I could see a scenario where you don't see this pullback right here, but you could see a 42 pops out of that channel and then gets crushed back down to 35, 33. At 33, I would start deploying, right? I think, I'm okay with, and there's people out there already going, hey, dude, why don't you just go buy it, right? It doesn't matter. It's like, we're talking about the difference between, 20 Bitcoin. Like, you need to wait. I mean, if you see this pattern, that gives you the opportunity to buy $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 off this price, I'm not going to be patient enough to wait till post halving, and then it goes to 69, then gets cut down to 40 grand. Why would I do that? Right. To me, this is a part of this opportunity is a front running opportunity.
Exactly.
We could be wrong, Greg. Like, I'm not going to do this with Doge or any of the other coins. It's too much money, right?
Yeah.
It's and I want to be able to put this away and then focus on my other businesses, right? This is a real estate play for me that I look at just like an apartment deal that's going to, hey, I'm in it for 5 years, relook at it in 5 years and see what happens.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. So what's your time frame, and what are you looking at? So markets are designed to take the most amount of money from the most amount of people, right? So if you think about the positioning that's going on right now, this is very attractive. This is creating a lot of FOMO. It's creating it, like you said, in you the other day. You're like, man, I don't want to miss it. So what's the likely outcome here if you're a Jesse Livermore, or if you're Wyckoff talking about the composite operator, is that this is going to get a lot of people to FOMO in, and then it's going to drop and shake a lot of people out down in that 30,000 level, where people are going to go, oh no, I messed up. And then they drop. And then that's where the big, buying comes in. Now, this is given conditions that we're seeing in the markets, traditional markets, where everything stays normal. Traditional markets continue to do their thing. Again, I think if you get a big issue in traditional markets, which there are a lot of people still thinking we're going to see some fallout in traditional markets. There's news that banks are under pressure. There's geopolitical risk. There's other things that could create a sell-off in the markets. Bitcoin will follow, no matter what's going on with ETFs. It's a risk asset. It will follow. But that is your classic shakeout, and then take off from there into the ETF approvals. So to your point, you hear the narrative in the space. Well, if Bitcoin's going to be $1 million, which a lot of Bitcoin bulls think it's going to be $1 million or $500,000, you're not going to care if you bought at 15 or 30 or 37. Sure, you will, because you could have bought twice as much. So you'll have twice as much at $1 million. So that's just a ridiculous, argument for people there. So you got to think about what's your time frame. So if you're going to hold always and forever, that's a different decision than like what I do, trading the ranges and the moves and looking for exponential moves. That's why I've been in stocks. I've had stocks that have, tripled in the last, 6 months, where Bitcoin's doubled, so that's why I've been in stocks. But now I'm waiting for that big move into Bitcoin, catch that double real quick in Bitcoin into the ETF. And I don't care if that's 40 to 80 or if it's 37, I don't care. I'm just looking to make a double. Then I'm going to rotate into a couple of altcoins that I'm watching that I know I'm going to get a 4 to a 10x out of.
Yeah, see, I love talking to you because you always frame it into, hey, look, this is a short-term play. This is a 3 to 6 month play. Gary's talking about a 5-year play. They're very, 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 very different strategies. And to confuse the two is a massive mistake. I see so many amateurs, and I've been get into a position, hey, this is a short-term trade that turns into a long-term hold, right? Because I got it wrong. That's a mistake. That's just an amateur mistake to make. It's either I need to put it in a short-term bucket, and I have some of that. Like I own some Dogecoin, I own some XRP, whatever, but it's not. It's not meaningful money, right? I mean, I just gave some money to a cancer lady, trying to raise some money. It's $1,000 or something. It's not. It's a game, right? It's literally throwing some money on a table. I should probably just give the money to the cancer lady, right? Because it's not going to change anything in my life. But making a decision for 5 years with my children's future, I think I like talking about this, like communicating about it, and saying, hey, where am I going wrong here, right? How could I possibly go wrong here? What's my downside? Twitter and other platforms like this and the community that we're building offers us an opportunity to get advice from other experts and not have to pay for it. Like literally you and I are able to like transfer information between each other and go, how could this possibly be wrong? So
yeah, and so let's talk about that. And so number one, nobody knows. No, I don't care who they are in the space, how long they've been in there. Satoshi himself, nobody knows, or themselves, whoever that is, nobody knows what this is going to do, where it's going to go, and when. Nobody. There's no way to know that. So what is your potential downside? So if you think about what's happening now, the asset is becoming a legitimate asset with the ETF approval. Once those are approved, you now have a legitimate asset, probably always and forever, depending on the strength and the health of the network. Right now, there's 900 Bitcoin mined every day. That's going to get cut to 450. 4 years out from that, it's going to get cut to 225. So as that supply diminishes, as long as there's continued sufficient demand, price should arguably continue to go up and or stay up. The thinking in the ETF industry is that's going to bring more stability to the price. So the real question is, what is your downside? How low could Bitcoin ultimately go, and how long would it stay there? What's going to be the floor and the bottom, of that price moving forward? Because that's really what you got to think about. What is your ultimate downside? Right now, I don't think there is one. I think the price could go all the way down to 5,000 or whatever, because we've seen it there twice in the last 4 years. The pandemic, 4,500, the bottom of the 2018, 2019 run, 3,500. So we've seen that twice in 4 years. And we've seen 21,000 and 69,000 twice in 4 years. So we know where it's gone, so the question is, where is your real bottom now with ETF, with a legitimate asset, with all the liquidity coming into space? And these entities that are entering this space are long-term patient money. I think that's the other thing people need to think about. Life companies, pension funds, the institutional funds that are going to allocate 0.5%, 1%, whatever it is, they're not trading. They are long-term. They're annuity buyers. They're buying 20-year, 30-year treasuries, because they have to pay those dividends. They have to pay those those pension payments, all of those things. So I think you have a longer-term, more patient investor entering the space. And what does the ETF have to do? Well, the ETF, as they sell shares, have to accumulate Bitcoin to back those shares up, value for value, right? So as the price of the shares go up, they got to buy more Bitcoin. As it goes down, they would have to sell. But if you have long-term capital coming in, like those people like you that aren't going to sell in 5 years or 10 years, you're 20 years, 30 years, because this is a legacy play for you. This is a legacy play for them as well. So that's what's interesting to me, is that, this base very well could be put in right now, 30 to 40,000. That could be a base, barring any kind of an economic meltdown. But then I think it will always minimal come back to this. So I don't know if there is a losing position in 30 to 40,000.
If you pull up your GBTC, pull up the chart on GBTC, people talk about how well Bitcoin's done, but in fact, GBTC is up 230% year on year. Now, I think this is a canary in the coal mine, Greg, and that gives me a lot of comfort. At the very bottom of that chart, that's where Bitcoin was at 15,000. So this stock went from $49, $54, something like that, full NAV, net asset value of 650,000 Bitcoin sitting in the fund. Then FTX happened. You know, people are like, hey, is it really in the fund? Well, it survived the last 9 months of, hey, is it in the fund? FTX, Celsius, all these other problems, SVB. And it's like, there's no scenario I can come up with that Grayscale doesn't get the ETF. And my thesis is this. Oh, I love the way you're drawing that line. My thesis is this. Why would BlackRock or Vanguard or whoever's going to win this want someone holding 650,000 Bitcoin outside of the ETF? That's just not possible to happen, dude. Like, no chance that a fund that big is going to be left outside, right? Like, they are the ultimate holder. They hold the most. Like, to me, GBTC is the perfect altcoin. You see what I'm saying? To me, it's like, wow, we know the reserves are there. Well, I don't know the reserves are there, but it just stood through a fairly heavy duty questioning season of who owns and who doesn't own these coins. Very difficult for me to imagine that they're outside the ETF world. Now, that doesn't mean that the ETF gets approved, but you know, it's a very interesting chart. MicroStrategy, of course, is going to emulate this fairly similarly, but MicroStrategy is not going to be part of the ETF. They're a public company. This thing could most certainly be. And this spread, right? That discount went from 46% to now less than 7%.
Yeah. You know, I'm drawing these. I'm not a technical analyst either by any means, but, you know, I can draw some trend lines, and I look at RSI and things like that. To me, when we talk about a base, and if you look at this long-term trend from the bottom of that, you know, 2018, 2019 bull market, I think the pandemic was an anomaly. I think Bitcoin's bull market, you know, recovery was starting after that bear market of 2018, right here, right before the pandemic went up in December of 2020. You know, pandemic happens, quickly recovers, and then it continues on from there. Of course, this was, you know, liquidity injection to the moon. But if you look at this long-term trend and you play this thing out, it just kind of continues to go up over time. You know, and if you put this, you know, even on a, you know, bigger chart, I mean, you can see once the asset pretty much stabilized, you know, coming out of these earlier cycles, you know, even if you flattened it a little bit and connect kind of the 2018, you know, you're still running an upward based trend line, you know, for these historical lows. And I mean, right now you've got a, you know, $20,000, $17,000 range. It just keeps going up and up and up as the asset keeps going up. I mean, that's almost a channel, you know, in and of itself. And, you know, GBTC did the same thing, which it just basically, you know, tracks Bitcoin, obviously. But, you know, these trend lines are interesting, you know, where you can kind of look at these bases that these assets draw out over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, you're, you know, I expected a bit more pessimism probably from you than I'm getting. So this is a really good conversation to have. Because that's the way I'm feeling. I'm feeling like there's a base here. And I think, you know, when you start talking about family offices, I don't think we fully appreciate these people are like Mass Mutual just picked up $100 million worth of Bitcoin. That's 0.005% of their total capability. They're going to do billions of dollars, and they're going to be doing it for 5 years and not even consider it. It's going to be 1 or 2% of their portfolio. I'm starting to hear the Grant Cardones of the world. People keep pushing on, hey, dude, like, you're not getting the Bitcoin thing. Hey, no, I'm interested in it. I'm seeing softening it on across the board, dude. Softening from everybody that was the poo-pooer. You know, nah, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm seeing people start to really look at this very differently. And I don't think you've had a lot of professional players here. I think it's kind of amateur players. No offense to anyone.
Well, the real legitimate, you know, money that has restrictions, regulations, and mandates, right? So family offices, you know, life companies, pension funds, hedge funds, and it's kind of like venture capital or private equity, right? So if I come to you and say, hey, Gary, I've got a deal, man, you want to invest, you're going to look at that deal and you're going to say, well, I've never invested with Greg. Let me put, 100,000 with it, see how that goes. That's probably, half of 1% of your net worth, not even whatever. So 100 grand to use nothing. If you're worth 100 million, it's a very small amount. So, or if you have a net liquidity investable capital of 100 million. So I'd start to do well and you like the way I'm doing. Now you're going to put 500 with me. And then I'm doing really well. Now you're going to put, 5 million with me. So the same thing is happening to Bitcoin. This is why, I've always understood the upside, but I'm also very realistic and pragmatic. And I also really want, as a developer, a real estate developer, I always look for, like you say, what can go wrong? Where's the landmines? Where's the risk? I'm trained to look for the pitfalls. So I've always looked at this asset in this space as, what's the worst case scenario? Where's your landmines and your pitfalls? Number one, there was no institutional capital at scale in the space. There was no regulation. There was no clarity. There was no legal structure around it all. So now we're getting all of that, as a legitimate asset, a legitimate space, and we're getting some of the junk out of there. FTX is gone. Binance is coming under, watch now. The last wild card you have in the space is Tether, and I think they're, going to start to come under scrutiny. And so once you have eyeballs on these things, it's not going to eliminate everything, but it's going to eliminate a lot of things that helps bring the family offices that look and say, as long as Tether and Binance are there, manipulating this thing, and I can get caught off guard overnight, or whatever could happen, I'm not interested. But now that stuff is taken care of. We've got all this other regulatory clarity coming out. And then with that ETF approval, that's the final straw in the camel's back that just puts a floor under everything, I think. And, really, really creates a legitimate asset long-term. The only risk you have moving forward now is the maintenance of the network, the security budget. And that's a real conversation, because you need transactional volume to sustain the network at some point down the road. When you get down to where only 120 Bitcoin are being mined every day, if that price is not up, that's a real problem.
Yeah, I can't worry about that. I mean, I have to believe the markets are going to work. We've gone through this before. People talk about, hey, the miners aren't going to get paid. Markets always work, right? If you don't interfere with them, they work. And could we have a few stage days where, you have monster volatility? I'm most certain that will happen over 10, 15 years. Let's, before we wrap up, if you got a few more minutes, what do you think would happen if the government came out and said, look, we're just not, January the 8th, we're not ready. There's more to do. There's issues out there. Now, I think if I'd have told you 5 months ago that CZ was going to, come to America and settle a deal, first off, why would the government do that? Like, what motive would they have? It took me 3.5 years to settle an FTC suit for 100 grand. How the hell did this get settled in 7 days for $4.3 billion? There must be a problem that the U.S. government doesn't want exposed. Otherwise, this would not have gotten handled this quickly.
Yeah.
He's not going to do any real time. Okay. They're not going to stop the token market. It's going to show up in Dubai, Japan, wherever. I like, what do you think if what's his name comes out and says, we're not approving this? What does that do to Bitcoin's price?
I think if it's flat out denied, obviously I think it'll take a little steam out of the engine. I don't think it'll completely collapse and deflate. I think Bitcoin, with the halving cycle and with the hype narrative and just everything, normal 4-year cycles, it'll continue to go on its runs, but the long-term floor that's put in could be, that could be at risk. But yeah, I think you'd see a little bit of sell-off. You'd see, just like we've seen every time it gets punted, but if it's flat out denial and we're never going to approve, that's a different conversation. If it's just denial and now we're looking at May, then things just kind of keep going, and the can just keeps getting kicked down the road.
Yeah, that's interesting. You don't think it's could be so painful. So this is, we're almost December the 1st.
And the reason I say that is there are so many people. The thing that's really impressed me over this year with Bitcoin, since the bottom, of last year, that 15,000 level, is the true Bitcoin investors, maximalists, believers. They didn't sell, and they're not going to sell, no matter what. So, some of these other entities that are entering, they're not going to sell either. So that keeps the price at a certain level. Now, there's a lot of Bitcoin transacting, 900 something a day, I think, transact or whatever. No, that's how much is mined right now. But there's a lot of transacting, and miners have to sell right now to stay alive, and they have to sell, ongoing to stay alive. I don't know how many Bitcoin transact every day, but it's a lot. It's a lot more than people think. But there's a lot of people that just won't sell too, and the more people you get that can't sell and that won't sell, and that's the key. There's going to be these institutions that are coming in are not going to be able to sell just because of the way they have to book these things and stuff like that. They're going to need to hold long term, and they're long-term investors. That just puts that floor under things even without an ETF.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, Greg. So I think, I think what I'm going to do is place some bids. It's hilarious. You say, hey, this is going to be my strategy. I'm going to place 10 Bitcoin at 35, 10 Bitcoin, whatever that strategy is. And then the guys go, oh, the algorithm's going to see your bids down there and it's going to move the market. I'm like, seriously, can you do anything right? I mean, is there any play here? It's funny, I put
some stink bids in at 30. You just never know, depending on what exchange you're working with, you could get some little wicks down to 30 and get some orders filled. You just never know.
Totally. But it's interesting. I put the whole bucket last night just to see what would happen. I put it in there at like 36. I was like, okay, if they hit me for 36, let's see what happens, right? Market went up 70 cents. That's what the 38 was. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Now it's off. I'm not saying that I moved it, but you put 50 Bitcoin down there at 34, 35. I mean, somebody has to see that.
They're watching you, man. You put your bid in, they're like, let's raise it 1,000. So you raise 1,000. Let's raise it another 1,000. So they're
yeah. Now what I should do is go put it on there on the sell side. I'd be terrified if somebody hit me. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody, I don't know if you know this, what the OTC market trades at, whether it's a premium or discount. I should probably ask some of my buddies. How does the OTC trade and how much volume do you need to do to participate there?
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways that's working. Like, you can buy directly from miners, and then you can go through a intermediary. So it's hard to know. Depends on who needs to sell and how fast, and they don't want to move the market. So if you're a miner, you need liquidity. You're going to sell at a discount, and you're going to sell direct because you don't want to move the market.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be interesting. Going to be interesting Christmas, I think. I was hoping this was going to be my Christmas gift to my kids and myself.
It could be. I mean, the thing is that nobody knows, and this is a risk asset still. Even with everything that's going on, it's a risk asset. It's trading as such. I know it functions differently and all that, but the way it trades and the investment thesis or the investment vehicle that this is a risk asset. You just don't know where things are going to go, and it is tied to traditional markets. So your biggest risk out there right now, everything else is lining up perfect. The 4-year cycle, the halving coming. I mean, just everything that traditionally works with Bitcoin is working. And it's interesting that all that's lining up with ETFs. The whole halving, the 4-year cycle, everything's lining up with ETF approval in January. The way this thing works, that's just putting exponential fuel to the fire. But you still have economic risk out there. You still have geopolitical risks, but the economy's humming along. The consumer's doing better than everybody thought. The GDP came in, strong because of government spending, whatever. The numbers are there. Things are looking good, and the markets are up, almost back to previous all-time highs again. So, it's an interesting scenario, the way everything is setting up.
Yeah, agreed. Well,
just remember, the one thing I tell everybody, if you're a short-term or shorter-term investor, if you're not thinking legacy play, you're putting stuff away, you're just going, the most important thing you need to be able to recognize is the top, not the bottom. You need to know when the top is, because if you need liquidity, if you're doing this for a reason, you want to buy a house, you got to pay for college, you got to do whatever, understand where the top is so you can get out around that top, take some chips or all your chips off the table to ride that storm out. Don't ride it down unnecessarily when you can sell here, even if you're long-term, and buy back in down here later.
Yeah, I know we only got a couple of minutes, but just real quick question while we're talking about commodities. And I think gold, silver, what do you think gold, silver here? It's really, silver's done pretty well. I think if the gold bugs are right, that's got to be very positive for Bitcoin. That's my thesis. Everything you've said today, actually. Okay, the ETF gets disapproved. You still have the halving. It's like a fallback. And I assume the ETF is going to get approved, but I removed the benefits of that halving in my thought process.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still a narrative, and it's still going to create, demand and scarcity in people's minds.
Yeah, well, it's real. I mean, you're reducing the real volume. I mean, if you have $1 billion of debt on a miner, dude, and they can only produce half the coins, something's got to move. Either the price has to move or the cost going into it. And the cost of electricity isn't going to massively change tomorrow morning. But gold, silver, I mean, I'm seeing the whole market look at investing in some assets that have, long-term protection per legacy anyway. Gold and silver have been safe havens. Are we seeing that? Do the charts show you that too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's big projections on everything right now. I mean, a lot of people think we're in that last leg of the super cycle, big melt up and everything, and then, pull some chips off the table and get ready to do it again. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I mean, there's people that say that we got a big crash coming too. So multi-generational long-term crash. And I just don't know. I don't know if that's even possible right now with where the economy is and what the Fed can do and liquidity where it's at and those types of things. I don't know. All I know is, that's why I'm a speculator and I play the trend.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for this. It's been really helpful for me, Greg. We should do this more often. Actually, I miss talking to you.
Yeah. It's been a little while. And, again, for everybody, let's get Gary to 10,000 subscribers today. This is his YouTube channel here, Gary Cardone, at Gary Cardone. I'll put this link below because you've got some really good content. I know you have some more really great guests coming up. And we need to do this on a regular basis.
Greg, thanks so much, buddy. Have a great weekend. And I'm sure I'll talk to you before then, but Merry Christmas to you. Okay.
Yeah. Merry Christmas to you and everybody watching.
All right, buddy. Thank you.